This story really sent shockwaves throughout the country. It's been on the A block of every news show. President Biden even responded. You mentioned part of his response. Can we now dissect what did he say in the wake of these bank failures?
Yeah, so Biden's response was he didn't take any questions. It was just a 5 minute prepared response. So would have been interesting, especially as when he was vice president, helping lead the U.S. through the 2008 financial crisis. Would have been interesting hearing him, kind of answer everything. But there were some interesting tidbits in his speech. One quote I liked was, "That's how capitalism works," referring to equity investors losing all their money. And obviously that that makes sense. I mean, the federal government is not going to try to falsely prop up a stock, but that goes to show. I mean, there is a limit to intervention. And he said that the federal government will do everything possible. Also mentioned that he plans to introduce legislation to Congress. We would have I would I don't know personally what the fate of such regulations would be. But there's a lot of criticism from both sides of the aisle to the federal government's response. The Biden administration's been pretty steadfast, saying this isn't a bailout, but it pretty much is. And yeah, so there's been a lot of criticism. But yeah, I mean, I think Biden and his officials have you know tried to make this seem as isolated an incident as possible. And also with the bailout, I mean, they're very clear, saying the taxpayers won't are not bearing the brunt of any of this cost. He actually said it twice. And that's not really true.
How is that
So
not true? I want to talk about this because, as a lot of our viewers know, as I remember the great financial crisis of 2008 and those bailouts. Is this bailout similar to that?
so no, yes and no, but more towards the no. No,
Because
I
he
mean,
said
it's a
he made sure
bailout.
to say this is not a bailout, correct?
What was that?
He made sure to say this is not a
Yes.
bailout, right?
So yeah, him and especially Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, she went on a morning show on Sunday to clarify that. But so the technicality there is that it's money that's being used from federal banking fees, and the offloading of Silicon Valley Bank's assets. They have not found a buyer to that at this point. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are funds that are earmarked directly from the banking industry, kind of being reinvested into it. But it's still money that's under control from the federal government, and thus would be taxpayer. So I guess it's not taxpayer money in the sense that it's not, money coming from me or you's income taxes that's going towards this, but it is money that would be earmarked for public use. So yeah, I mean, it's not so much, I don't remember, exact numbers and magnitude of the bailouts, but that's it's several magnitudes less than the 2008, but it's still a pretty drastic action from the federal government to ensure confidence in the banking industry.
Of course, and a quote that stuck out to me was him saying, President Biden saying, we'll do whatever is needed to prove our banking system is safe. So is this issue contained, or is this just a band aid kicking the can down the road for a potentially larger problem?
I mean, it's probably more so the former. Um, Again, I mean, I haven't seen anyone that's calling, saying they're expecting, larger institutions to fail. And I will say, I mean, said this before, but these were the second and third largest bank failures in U.S. history. So, kind of dismissing them is, it is probably not a smart thing to do. But the health of the 10, 15, 20 largest banks is not really in question. And we actually saw yesterday Charles Schwab, which is the seventh or eighth largest bank by market cap, but they had not so much run, but their stock was down, I think, as much as 20% yesterday. It ended up down 11%, and then added back on a lot of the losses during trading today. But that was the closest big bang. I think that there was definitely the most panic there. That they released a statement saying our liquidity is good. But a lot of the times with banks, when you have to release a statement saying your liquidity is good, that tends to that tends to precede some not so great things happening. But yeah, I mean, again, I mean, Moody's said they're looking at 6 regional banks. I think it wouldn't be absolutely shocking if we were to see one of these smaller banks, need to have the federal government come save the day. But I think it would truly be shocking if, there was something and there was some major event like we saw in 2008. I think also the big difference is that the shocks are way more contained. I mean, in 2008, it was kind of a banking industry wide problem, with all the the bad loans, trading securities, yada yada. So yeah, I think it very, very unlikely that it will spread in a major way, but that's not to say that there won't be upcoming major issues.
Dare I say you sound cautiously optimistic? Obviously, you're saying this, and we can't discount that this is the largest collapse since the Great Recession, which you said. But did President Biden's actions, did his remarks do anything to tamp down fears?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty impossible situation to be in, and one term have heard a lot related to this, and just generally in economics as well, as moral hazard. So there's been a lot of criticism about, okay, like if this moral hazard of if you bail out these 2 banks and these uninsured depositors who knew that this was a possibility, then what's next? And that's always an issue with monetary economic policy. But I think there's way more to criticize and focus on what lack of regulation or poorly guided regulation maybe led to these circumstances. However, I think it's pretty hard to criticize the actions of the Biden administration too much. I think if they had not, guaranteed that these depositors get their money back, I think we would have seen way more panic about the banking industry as a whole. And obviously, you want to do everything possible to prevent that. I think it was a fairly conservative approach. I mean, and there's still some pretty strong criticism about the actions that led up to this. But yeah, I mean, I think that Biden and its top economic officials probably did pretty pretty good job, all things considered, in tamping down kind of the worrisome sentiments.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier in the conversation, was that some lawmakers on both sides of the aisles were criticizing President Biden. What has the response from lawmakers been?
Yeah, I mean, my colleague, or our colleague, Sarah Dorn, has covered a lot more about the response. On the left, Elizabeth Warren, who sits on the Senate Banking Committee, she's been pretty critical, especially critical towards Jerome Powell specifically, and a lot of criticism from the left, including from Biden, from Warren, is related to deregulation that came during the Trump administration, and criticism from the right has been, I think a little bit less focused, I would say, and just I think it's criticism of not letting kind of the free market regulate things, because obviously this is a large government intervention in financial markets. So yeah, I mean, again, like, I don't think anything has been, extremely scathing, but I think yeah, I think, and Elizabeth Warren's issues too. It's like, okay, like, you're coming to save these billion-dollar, companies that knew that they had, maybe were not in the most secure business dealings, and then kind of leaving, the everyday American to bore the costs of this. So yeah, I mean, there certainly has been pushback, but nothing too severe.